Okay, and we're live.
Hey guys, so we are live from Angular World Tour Pakistan. So this is the first event we are hosting from Angular World Tour from Pakistan. So I am with Ema. She's developer relations from Google, and we also have Tracy. Tracy is founder of this Dot Labs. So yeah, this event is for is for the Angular technology stacks, and we will be talking cool things. So this is first time from Pakistan. So yeah, let's start with the event, and I should have to pass out towards Ima, so Ima should have to go first. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. Super excited to be here. Um, so, my name is Emma Twersky, and I'm a developer relations engineer on the Angular team at Google. And I'm super excited to be talking about the state of Angular and sort of how we're thinking about Angular development right now, as well as what we're working on and what you can look forward to next. So, our team has thought a lot about our core values, and at the heart of it, we want to create a platform for app developers who love to build great applications so that you can create apps that everyone loves to use from your users. And one of my favorite parts is creating a community where everyone feels welcome. So everyone is building together. That's one of the joys of open source, that we're building with the technology we love and our users are loving what we're creating. So the community is a huge part of that, right? Open source means that the community is everyone. If you're watching this, you're a part of that. And any framework or technology really only goes as far as a community is willing to take it. And so you specifically as the Angular community are really phenomenal. And I have felt so welcomed joining the team because of that. So let's talk a little bit about what that community is. There are a lot of great people in the communities, such as Tracy, who's on this call, Mohammed, who organized this meetup. There's all kinds of different meetups. There's James Henry, who maintains ESLint. And these are all people who are electing to contribute back to this community because we all care about Angular. So, since I am an Angular member at Google, I think it's always best to really start out this talk talking about what Angular is doing at Google, right? Like behind the screen, a lot of people are like, okay, so like you can see the open source side of Angular, but what about Angular at Google? At Angular, there are thousands of developers developing Angular code every month. And in fact, any code written at Google passes through at least 1 to like 5 Angular applications, right? So our in-browser code editor is Angular. Our code review system, similar to GitHub, is Angular. So even if the code is written in Rust or it's an Android application, it's all passing through Angular, and Angular is helping power everything that Google is developing. So there's a large investment there. And specifically, there's about 1,000 new developers every year learning Angular and going through our introductory courses and onboarding to Angular at Google. So quite a lot of volume there. And if you look at the number of applications, there is a significant increase in the number of Angular applications at Google. So year over year, there's about almost 1,000 new applications, somewhere between 1,000 and 500. And in fact, last year we saw the largest jump yet with, again, another 1,000 new Angular applications being added to Google. And so these are things from internal tools to large applications, right? Google Cloud is one of the largest examples of an Angular application. I believe there's like, it's too early for me to quote, but maybe like 10 million lines of code there. Or Firebase is another great example with like over 2 million lines of Angular code. So very large scale projects, all the way down to there is a incubator space at Google of new projects. And there have been some really cool projects that come out of that are Angular applications for like new social media apps or things like that that are very small and sort of more of like a startup feel. So we've talked about Ivy a lot in the past, and hopefully you're familiar with that word, but Ivy was the rewrite of our rendering engine. And at Google specifically, we've seen that there was a 90% reduction in computational resources when we migrated to Ivy. So last year, we took the undertaking of moving all of Google over to Ivy. So if you're familiar, Ivy came out in version 9 a few years ago, and we have since been working on that full migration. And with that, again, a 90% reduction in computational resources and 50-minute increase or decrease in build time. So for the largest application at Google, that was a 50-minute decrease, which I believe one of the team members quoted is equivalent to about 3 developers on their team's entire year-long work. So we essentially just freed up 3 whole developers for those teams to work on better things, right? If you have migrated to Ivy, you'll know that it's a much faster build, significantly smaller, and really just like a huge increase. So bringing that to Google, we saw a lot of really great impact. So that's Google, and there's a lot more to it, but really the bulk of what Angular thrives with is outside of Google. So everything we develop with Angular at Google is testing and creating edge cases so that when we develop Angular, we can test Angular super safely against a massive code base of different uses of Angular. And the real benefit of that is for people like you or people in the community using Angular. So a common question I get is, how do I contribute? How do I be a part of the Angular team, or how do I be a part of the Angular community? And so before we talk about community, I just want to say that there are a million ways to contribute to open source or be a part of Angular. You can be, the most common thing we think of is submitting pull requests, like actually contributing to the Angular source code on Google. But that's really one of the smallest ways, right? Like Angular is very established, it's very stable. And so a lot of the PRs going into the GitHub repository are pretty complicated or really small nit fixes. And so there are a ton of even better ways that I'd encourage you to think about contributing, whether that's opening issues if you reach a new edge case, or if you have a new idea for something you think that our team should think about as a feature request. Or even if you just reach a similar issue that somebody else has already opened an issue for, and you add your input to that open GitHub issue. So GitHub issues are my favorite way for people to contribute, because you're using Angular in ways we're not thinking of, and we want to make sure your voice is heard. And the best way to do that is through GitHub. Similarly, in GitHub discussions, we have RFCs, or requests for comment, and that's open ways that we're communicating design ideas to create an open community design review, right? So if you can think about it, we'll talk about it in a little bit. Sorry, my cats are being loud. But let's say typed forms are coming up soon. And the way that we initially proposed that to the community was through an RFC, where we said, hey, we want to solve this issue. We think we have a design for it. Let us know what you think, test it out. There was a prototype involved. And commenting on those RFCs to say hey, this is going to break everything is the best use case, right? For an RFC. We want to know before we change something if we're going to break you. So RFCs are a great place to get started in our GitHub discussions. And then similarly, just following us on Twitter and commenting or letting us know if we have surveys or ask questions, or just being involved on social media is also a great way to make sure our team reads everything that you put there. I personally read it all, so I can guarantee that your voice will be heard on social media. So now that you're a part of the community, let's talk about Angular's adoption in the community. And during our most recent check, we saw a growth on NPM from about 1.4 million downloads per week to 2.6 million. So over 1 million new weekly NPM downloads of Angular. And what's interesting here is that those numbers don't take into account any private repositories or GitHub repositories, as well as things that aren't on NPM. So for example, we already talked about Angular at Google. Google doesn't use NPM. Google maintains its own individual instance of Angular internally. So none of those Google projects of millions of developers working on Angular at Google are included in these statistics. So because Angular is so enterprise focused, we assume that there are a lot of instances like Google of companies using Angular without using NPM downloads. So we estimate that this number is significantly higher. And similarly, on GitHub projects, we can see that it is used by over 1.8 million GitHub projects in open source. So that's always really exciting to look through those code bases and have resources for learning or seeing how people are using Angular in different ways. We have also seen some major milestones online with our social media. Our Twitter hit 400, I think it's at like 410 or something followers. We have 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. And if you're not following us there already, definitely go do that, because that is by far the best way to get in contact with our team and learn about new resources we're putting out. So I talked about the RFC process. This is requests for comment, which is in our GitHub discussions. And you can go there right now to see a bunch of closed RFCs, or keep it as like a bookmarked tab, because I have some very exciting ones coming up soon. Hint, hint. You heard it here first. But the RFC process is something that we launched recently with more than 8 RFCs in 2021 and over about 275 comments that have been seen by over 700,000 developers. And what these are again, just open communications of our design patterns or design thinking. So after an internal design review with Google developers, we open it up to experts, our Google Developer Expert Program, and then we open it up to the community. And we want to make sure that, again, any major design implementation or even minor design implementation going into Angular has a chance to be reviewed by the community first. So this is the best way to know what's coming soon. So really a release should not be all that exciting, because by the time a release is out, it's been in an RFC, it's been in a bunch of like next versions, and then it's released in the version. Some great examples of this are the Internet Explorer deprecation was an RFC to talk about what the best timeline for that would be. There were new date adapter RFCs, and even the plans for future end-to-end testing and Protractor were an RFC. I'll talk about some open RFCs right now, or some more recent RFCs in a little bit, but some other ones that you can look forward to are typed forms, which is the #1 GitHub issue, and standalone components, which has by far gotten the most energy and is a new way to think about a module-less Angular. So let's talk about some of those RFCs that made it in. So version 13 landed last November, and we're gearing up for version 14 right now. But in the meantime, let's talk about what happened in November and some of the cool stuff that happened there. So like I said, RFC for the deprecation of Internet Explorer 11 was a part of that. This means that you can CSS Grid, native ECMAScript APIs, and web animation APIs, and a ton more. There's a ton of really fast. Sorry, my internet is bugging. But yeah, highly recommend you go look at some of the latest CSS, because Internet Explorer 11 was really the big holdup for moving to a modern CSS framework. And modern yeah, let's see. Similarly, we had an RFC for Ivy library distribution. This is the modern Angular package format, where we partially compile Angular and remove UMD bundles in order to leverage ES 2020 output. This was really exciting, and again, is a part of that new release just by updating. So this is all just an NG update. Similarly, there's improved accessibility. Things like the MDC components have a lot of improvements to accessibility, focus indicators, click target sizes, high contrast mode, all kinds of really great impact there. And specifically, the build process with ES Build is now improved to 10% faster builds. So we've removed the build optimizer and Babel transform and replaced it with Babel transform. So that's a 10% faster build. Again, this is all just like in the NG update. So version 13 has a lot of cool stuff. Additionally, there's Adobe font inlining, Webpack 5 cache, dynamic validator control, and again, that better accessibility. So a lot of cool stuff there. More recently, version 13.1 has some really cool stuff with animations packages. This was a community contribution, so really cool. TypeScript 4.5, and a bunch of other bug fixes. Version 13.2, even more recently, landed with more animations packages, cleanup, a bunch of form control fixes and exciting features there, safe calling of template expressions, and all kinds of really cool stuff. And one of the really cool things is called extended diagnostics. And extended diagnostics were part of this minor release, but are really a major version. And you'll hear about this a lot in the version 14 communications. But this is a way for code editors to warn developers of common mistakes before compilation. So almost like a language service, this is a way for us to provide a specific error for Angular specific code in your templates natively to like your code editor. So way before you're deploying it to like production or even like putting it in some sort of runtime environment, you can catch those errors. Right now, we released it with 2 common errors. So inverted to a binding syntax. So like a comma bracket when that's reversed, and it should be like bracket comma. And then nullish coalescing, so that nullish coalescing indicator. And then, yeah, so those are the first 2. So banana in a box and nullish coalescing. But the really cool thing about this and why I'm really excited is that it is totally scalable and extendable. So that's why they're called extended diagnostics, is it's just a framework to be able to write your own diagnostics. So if you think there's an error that like your teams are running into a lot, you can run a diagnostic to try and find that in the templates prior to deploying it. And you can surface those as either a warning or an error. So for larger teams or teams with new developers, these diagnostics are really making sure that you're catching those errors as you're writing the code and you're learning to write better code versus accidentally deploying them to like production and seeing those errors out in the wild. So really cool there. And I'm really excited about the future of extended diagnostics. There's some really great issues open for ideas for future extended diagnostics that we could support. There's a lot of space for things like accessibility fixes or like accessibility best practices in Angular and things like that. So those are the minor releases that are out right now. There's also a 13.3 that has TypeScript 4.6. But what are we working on next? So quickly, we're looking at extended analysis, the simplified factory API, advanced guides, and MDC web. And specifically, if we look at that, we're again looking at additional extended template diagnostics. There's some open PRs of exactly what we want extended diagnostics to do in the future. Again, besides those 2 that we introduced, there's like a ton of opportunity here that we're exploring. A larger and more exciting thing is we're looking at strict typing for forms. So this is the #1 GitHub issue if you go to the Angular GitHub repository. And this is the idea that currently Angular forms are not type safe or null safe. And so this project was picked up by Dylan on the team, and he is looking at how to add typing for reactive forms. And so the idea here is to build complex nested forms, which are much safer and be fully backwards compatible, which is the big caveat here, right? Is like, we really like when we can release things that are backwards compatible. And that is the big part of this project. So here you can see an example of what the new form typed forms proposal would look like. And this is the idea that you can set form controls with types, and then errors will surface if, for example, this like lives value of the cat is actually a number, but you're trying to be a substring, or if the email property is not on the value of the cat, right? Then cat.value.email would be an error, versus right now we don't have that type safe checking. And again, all of this is to create better developer experience so that you can catch these errors when you're writing your code instead of like trying to deploy it and see errors somewhere in the wild. If you want to look more at this, again, in the GitHub discussion, there is a closed RFC for typed forms. There's a whole proposal in there with a whole example, so you can actually download the prototype and try it now. Or if you update to the latest versions, there's a lot of the underworkings of this already merged in. So there's been a ton of improvements to forms and some like small incremental journeys towards this typed forms release that has been a part of the last couple of minor versions. So lots of cool form PRs being merged in as we speak. The other really big thing is standalone components. And this is our sort of pet title for this idea of a simpler Angular in the future. And what standalone components are the idea that currently you have a component, right? So let's take our hello world component. And in order for this component to work, it has to be part of a module. And we have to separately declare all of this like module stuff of all our imports and our exports, and that's a whole separate file. And we have this module system, and that can be sort of confusing, especially for new developers to think about it in that terms. And so instead of doing that, we propose the idea of introducing this flag called standalone true. And so this means that this component doesn't need to be attached to a module. It can import everything itself. It can bootstrap itself, and it can be deployed and used all over without having to be a part of a module and imported and exported through that means. So it has its own compilation and bootstrapping. And this is going to be really exciting for this, again, idea of a simpler Angular. So if you're excited about this, I definitely recommend going and checking out the RFC and staying tuned for a follow-up RFC, which is planned for in the next couple of weeks. And we're super excited about. Currently, Angular releases on a time-based release, so it's unclear whether or not this will make it into the next release. But it is also available to minors since it's not a breaking change. So we're really excited about this. And this really is the future of Angular, and where we're headed is a simpler, easier Angular for new developers and staying true to the Angular we all know and love for more complicated use cases. So there's a lot to be excited about right now. Thank you again for being a part of the community. Hopefully you found some new ways to be a part of the community in this talk, or some links to go check out. GitHub, I think, was my most commented thing. And if not, hopefully you found some new features that you're excited about going and ng updating a project to make use of those new cool version 13 things, because version 14 is right around the corner. So thank you. And I'll pass it back to Mohammed.
Hey, thank you, Ima. It's been an amazing presentation. So yeah, it's been like an amazing insights, like how Angular is moving onwards. So yeah, there are actually some other features that everybody is going to love, and like personally, I'm also using and migrating towards the other applications, and throughout the organizations here at Pakistan and throughout the world, like the companies who are using Angular. So they are being very interesting and like to adapt those changes. So yeah, thanks for the amazing tech talk. And guys, if you guys have any questions for Ima's tech talk, so you guys can ask. You guys can ask in the comments. So yeah, so that we can answer those. Ima can answer those questions. So yeah, ask in the comments. So yeah.
It's okay if not.
Well, I think the great part is Emma's Twitter handle is right here at Tversky, and she's been amazing on
You guys
Twitter.
can ask. Yeah,
She's amazing on Twitter generally, and she's always available for questions. So thanks, Emma, for just like always bringing your energy. It's so cool to see like 100,000 followers on YouTube. That is so crazy.
Yeah, we're
for sure.
excited. Stay tuned. We have some cool stuff coming. Oh,
Yeah.
definitely also go register for Google I/O. That's not a
For
part of
sure.
this talk, but yeah. Hi, Ben.
Ben is here. Ben is here. He joined a little late, so yeah. Hi, Ben. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Emma.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now we have another amazing session from Tracy. She's a founder, as I already introduced her. She's a founder of this dot labs, and it's also have an amazing talk. So I can give that towards Emma. Oh, sorry, Tracy. You can go over.
Sure. Thanks. All right. Thanks everyone for being here today. Excited. I wish we were actually in Pakistan because that sounds amazing. But just wanted to give a quick talk about open source. I know all of you are really excited about open source and contributing and things like that. So this will be just a quick start guide. So again, question is how to contribute to open source. And I think the most amazing thing about that is that it's actually pretty easy and there's so many ways to do so. So my name's Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at Lady Leet. I'm the CEO of This Dot. We're about a 50% consultancy and we just love doing things for the community. And we are hiring as well. So for those of you in Pakistan, we are a global company and 100% remote too. So I'm also on the ARC core team. I'm a Google developer expert for Angular, a GitHub star, Microsoft MVP. And again, I just love doing things for the community. So you can always hit me up and I'm always happy to chat. My day job is pretty amazing and we get to work with some pretty like amazing clients. So really, really, really fun projects. And here's my email address. So again, if you are looking for a new position, feel free to message me and I would love to hear from you. So I'm going to take you through a little journey today. We're going to talk about how I got into open source, and then we'll talk about why maybe you would want to contribute to open source or why you are wanting to contribute to open source. Then we'll talk about, how you could potentially do so, and also some do's and don'ts as well. So let's go ahead and start off with me. So I started getting into JavaScript a few years ago, and I decided to attend a boot camp. And while attending boot camp, I was like, okay, JavaScript, this is exciting. So the first thing I did was join the community. I found Twitter. I started talking to people. I started just like figuring out who was going to Angular conferences, who was speaking, and got to know the community. And then after that, I started just kind of like sharing my journey. So at the time, Angular CLI was still kind of very new. It was like alpha or beta version, and Angular Materials, same thing. And so I was really excited about those two things. And I started just like talking and blogging as I was learning how to use these new tools and kind of navigating just again, these brand new technologies. This helped the community know that I was relevant, I was like excited about the things that they were excited about. And, I didn't really have to do much except for talk about my experiences. And same thing for you all. You don't really have to do much except for just talk about your experiences. Then the next thing I did was just meet maintainers, right? So getting to know people, getting to know who you are is important. And also getting to know other people is really important. And you can do this by just showing up, for example, like, bye, Ben, we'll see you later. But, Ben is at this meetup, so I'm getting to know Ben a little bit, or at conferences, if you go to conferences and see people, or even just on Twitter, like getting to know people. Like I said, Emma has a Twitter handle. I have a Twitter handle. Everyone has Twitter handle. Well, a lot of people have Twitter handles, and getting to know people again who are talking about Angular is very helpful, just in terms of your journey and just being able to contribute more. The fourth thing to do is just generally contribute. So I was already contributing from an education standpoint and like from a smaller standpoint, but then I was talking to Ben mostly. I feel like maybe a little bit of Jay as well, but like they just needed help. I think this was at the time where like, the RxJS documentation wasn't really there, and we just needed to like get the RxJS documentation going. There was a lot of confusion between like RxJS 4 and 5 and the documentation that was available. So I just like gathered up a docs team, started talking about the fact that we were creating a docs team. And, all of a sudden, like everybody started contributing, and we got the docs together in quite a short amount of time. And it was just kind of amazing to see that happen. So, you can do it too, I promise. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about kind of like why you might want to contribute. So, there are different reasons why you might want to contribute, whether they be functional or aspirational. If you're functional, I'm more talking about, hey, you're at work maybe and you need to fix something that's not working for you. And then aspirational is if you just want to like build a career through open source, right? That's also a really amazing way to approach it. From a functionality standpoint, I would say that if you're looking to contribute to open source or to a library, or like need something fixed or need to talk to a maintainer about something, it's much easier to get what you want when you want it by giving before you ask, right? So if you're thinking that you're going to be using something for work and you're thinking that you're going to need to like talk to maintainers, just join a community and do it in a genuine way, and help with whatever you can, right? I think another thing is before you give help, make sure to submit an issue first and ask for feedback. A lot of people think that certain features are necessary, but like maybe there's a reason why it hasn't been implemented yet. So before you spend a lot of time or like work on something that's like already planned, make sure to just like submit an issue and ask for feedback first. The next thing is just to like find maintainers in other forums. Like I talked about, Twitter is a really amazing way to do so. GitHub notifications and issues are really noisy. And, if you're not getting a response, like it's probably just because like no one noticed potentially. So finding people in other forums is a really great way to like build those relationships and like, kind of be more effective in terms of your communication. The fourth thing is just generally building good relationships and genuine relationships. You never want to approach a community like, hey, I need something, so I'm using you for this, right? Like everybody in open source is, doing good for the community. So making sure that you're like being honest and genuine about how you're approaching things is really important. The next thing is aspirational. Like if you're trying to build your career and grow as a developer, like this is a really, really great way to do so. I love open source. I think, because if you're doing something aspirational, the great thing is you don't actually have to join a specific community. So you can choose your own teams, right? So you can actually look. And I think the first thing to do is just looking at different communities and saying, hey, can I actually be a successful contributor here? Do I actually like this team? And you can do that by like looking at different issues, looking at the RFCs, looking at the PRs, just seeing like, can I actually work with these people? Do I like them? Finding them on Twitter, having conversations. And, if it's a no, then you can just go find something else, which is amazing, right? The second one is just the same as, what I said in the last slide, which is like making sure you're solving problems that maintainers want. I think like when you're being aspirational and you just want to contribute, you can look at things like good first issue, looking for help within a repo. I have this really awesome series. It's called How to Contribute on it's a series on YouTube. So have done how to contribute to Angular, how to contribute to RxJS, how to contribute to Redux, et cetera, et cetera. And every repo is like set up a little bit differently. Every team is set up a little bit differently. So trying to figure out like how things are set up. Typically READMEs are really awesome too. A lot of libraries also have like a how to contribute. Ben distracted me. He said happy birthday to me in the comments. Thanks, Ben. I forget that it's my birthday. I'm expecting a present, by the way. And then another thing is like the third thing from an aspirational standpoint is always helping with the documentation. I mean, I think even for work and you're trying to just like generally build a relationship and contribute slowly, like if you're using a library, like just helping with the documentation as you're using it is such an easy way to help and like be really useful. And I will tell you that like 90% of maintainers will tell you that like they could always use help with the docs. So like whether that's like helping with live examples, wording, better explanations, sometimes there is like updates, like RxJS just went through an update and like the documentation is a little bit out of date. So there's, again, so many ways from a documentation standpoint that you should just help. I mean, it's so easy. And then the fourth thing is just making sure you're educating and sharing. I think like if you're passionate about something, just like writing blog posts about your experience, what do you love? How do you use certain features? What challenges did you run into? How did you solve them? And sharing that with the community. You don't really have to be like, contributing code to a repo to be really relevant. A great example is like Mark Erickson, for example. He's the main Redux maintainer right now, but the way he started was just, looking at all the questions everybody asked on Redux, compiling them all, and then saying, hey, you know what? These are the top X amount of questions that people are asking. Maybe that should be in the Redux documentation. Doesn't that make sense? And he ended up, contributing that to Redux. And that was like his first step in to becoming a Redux maintainer. So it's easy. It's very easy. Just do what you think is helpful. The last thing we're going to talk about is just simple do's and don'ts of contributing to open source. I think first off, making sure that you have compassion. Maintainers are usually working for free on nights and weekends, and maintainers want to be treated like people. They're just as human as you are. They can only handle so many things, and they're not doing things to hurt you. They're doing things to try to help, right? So if you treat them badly, they're not going to help or talk to you. Also be professional. Even though you don't get paid for like open source generally, or you don't get paid to like, talk in open source, I guess. It's not your job. I mean, for most people, you should always treat relationships in open source as professional as you can. Nobody likes to deal with like disrespect. Always assume with the best of intentions too. And then also make sure to abide by a code of conduct, right? Typically there's a code of conduct. Angular has a great code of conduct. So does RxJS. And if you make sure you're following a good code of conduct, then it's, otherwise the community is just not going to be talking or be nice to you, or you even might get banned from the repo. That has definitely, I've seen that happen before. I think for the don'ts, don't act or be entitled, just be nice, be patient. Don't think you're the biggest priority. I mean, it's difficult because a lot of maintainers have full-time jobs and then a full-time job in open source. So just imagine having to do all that and juggle so many things. Also, don't be annoying. Don't email about an issue 10 times a day. Definitely follow up and follow up within reason. Harassment is not good, but definitely follow up too. I think a lot of people also forget to follow up. Also, don't complain. Everyone's trying their best. And again, sometimes you might not understand why a technical decision was made, but it's because you're not as close to the project as people working on it full time, right? So don't complain about something you're getting for free. So hopefully this helped you all just a little bit. Again, going into open source is not the most difficult thing in the entire world. It can be really amazing for your career. It's done amazing things for me. Like, I've loved all the people I've met. I've made so many friends. And I just, I'm super grateful every day for like the stuff I get to do in open source. Also, documentation. Again, please help with the documentation. There can never be too much documentation in the world. Again, we are hiring. So all of you folks out there, it's 100% remote and worldwide. We have amazing benefits, and we get to work on really fun projects. So you can always just email me, and I'm always happy to chat. Thanks so much. And I'll bring Mohammed back.
Hey, thank you so much, Tracy, for the amazing session over the open source. And community is proud to have you in the open source and doing contributions, right? So we are expecting everyone to contribute Angular if they are using Angular. So my main inspiration, and thanks to Marco, so I have did an open source contribution in back December 2021 for RxJS typing thing. So it's on production. So that's kind of an amazing feeling if you are doing open source. So as you shared in the slides, like there are two ways of doing open source. One is functional, and another one is inspirational. So functional is fine for it. So however, open source is automatically been setting up your careers right away if you're not thinking about it. So yeah, thank you so much, Tracy, for the amazing talk over the open source. So let's welcome our third speaker, which is me, myself. Give me a second. Okay, so the third speaker is for sure me. So I'm talking on the components API redefined with simplicity in Angular. Let me share my screen first. Yep.
Looks good.
Okay. Now let's thank you so much, guys, for this joining this amazing event. And we are in the Angular World Tour Pakistan. So we are doing this meetup firstly from Pakistan for the very first time. So today we are going to talk over components API redefined with simplicity. So components API is it's been introduced after the Ivy in Angular 13, Angular version 13. So we got an amazing component API redefined with the mechanisms of using multiple sort of boilerplate code to load off your components inside the multiple other components in directories. I'll talk about this in that. So the so
Oh no, Mohammed, your audio is like cutting out really badly. No, we can't hear you at all. Looks like Mohammed's having some technical issues, unfortunately. Umair, I see you had a question for Emma. Definitely ask her on Twitter. And I'll just post Emma's Twitter handle again. That is her Twitter handle. So she's happy to ask any questions. Or sorry, not ask any questions, answer any questions on Twitter. I think we'll wait just a few more minutes to see if Mohammed can get his stuff back up. And then we'll go from there. Thank you for the advice, Nuno. Yes, I think he should definitely try to present with audio. I feel like this is actually the first event where we've had so many technical issues. But it seems like everyone's audio is like not working, unfortunately. Or not audio, but internet is not working as well. Hi, Mohammed. Do you want to turn off your camera and try to present like that?
Yeah, sure. No, let me share my screen so that it will be fine. Okay, my screen. Let's share the screen first.
Okay. Do you want to turn your camera off?
Okay. Yeah. So we were. Yeah.
Your camera's still on. Okay. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Now let's talk about like what are the Angular dynamic components. So Angular dynamic components are to load over the components. There are actually multiple kind of components in the Angular. So the first one is like we can make a component and we can call over those. We can call that component with the selector one, right? And another way is like loading of your components with structural directives like ngIf and kind of stuff. So however, we are having with another strategy of loading components that is a dynamic component. Like assume that there's a component we have created over. So now we don't have to call that component from the route, or we don't have to call that component using selector. So the dynamic components are already the component which are being exist in your Angular applications, but those are not being called. So those are dynamically called for the instances whenever it's needed on the conditional basis. So we can make a container reference. We can make a container, and inside that we can actually call that view over, and we can call that reference to load those components. So those kind of components are called as Angular dynamic components in Angular. Okay. So the dynamic components are, as I already shared, components location in the application is not defined at the build time. So component exists, but it's not being called over. So that component is not used in any Angular template. So component is only being initiated. It's been only in place in the application at runtime. Like assume that there are actually multiple conditions, and on over of those on those conditional things, I actually want to attach that component in the DOM. So that's not been ever loaded at the build time. So those components are being in it when the application is on the runtime. So yeah. Okay. Now another thing is like what's actually the real scenario for dynamic components. So why we need dynamic components, and what are the real scenarios when we use them, and why we can adapt those real scenarios of the dynamic components. So there are multiple scenarios for using the dynamic components. So but however it's been totally dependent on the scope of the application where we are using it, and what's actually been the need of developing those dynamic components. And so however there are multiple strategies, there are multiple kind of things we can adapt with the dynamic components. So the first one is like if we are taking an example over tab switching. So for the above tab, assume that there are actually multiple bunch of above buttons, and after clicking on the second button, so we should have to load another component. So for these kind of tab switching thing, we can use dynamic components. However, like opening and closing of pop-ups or modals, so that's also been a strategy for adapting the dynamic components. and the other one is for fragmenting multiple views. Like if I'm clicking on if I'm clicking on the tab bar on any or any anchor tag from the application, so I should have to load multiple other component inside the multiple views. So that's also kind of a fragmenting strategy we can adapt with dynamic components. Also, the last we can also consume the forms strategy. Like if we are having the multiple forms on the conditional basis inside nested tabs, so for that basis actually we can also consume dynamic components. So there are multiple ways to choose, but it's totally dependent on the scope and the feature you are currently working on. So I was being involved in the club management ERP in my last employer, and in my last employer. So I was working with them. So that's kind of a fintech that's kind of a fintech module for POS. So inside that we were having the multiple tabs strategies. Inside those tabs we are having multiple fragmenting views and multiple forms with the separate with the separate conditions. So on that basis actually we highly used dynamic components there. But it was not on the era of Angular V12. We were adapting those changes before V13, but now it's been Angular is in a good hands, and like we are having an amazing strategies for loading of dynamic components without the a lot of boilerplate code to assigning those stuff. So it's been very easy today for loading the dynamic components in your Angular applications. Let's talk about the improvements of component API v13. So in Angular v13, we are having with the components API updates. So inside that, with the update of view container reference dot create component API, it's been an API where we can load our dynamic components. So it's now become easier for creating dynamic components in Angular app. So inside the Angular version 13, there's an update of view container reference. So like after v13 we don't have to worry about, and we don't have to add, we don't need to pass the component factory to a component reference anymore. So because there are actually a lot of code we should have to do in earlier versions, but now we don't have to use that one. We don't have to adapt the component factory resolver, and we don't have to pass the component references towards component factories. So yeah, that's been very easy. So Ivy creates an opportunity, so we can with the component of view container reference dot create component. So without creating an associated factory, we can dynamically load it our components. So this is how the Angular v13 enabled that one. So let's talk about the tech stuff, like how we should have to create those in earlier versions. So in earlier slides. Okay, so the main thing of this technical talk, like of while until I should have to show the source code, so it's been more like you should have a great picture like how we are using that. So here's an old way. So the slide you are looking over. So this is an old way of creating dynamic components before Angular v13. So the main thing we should have to do is we should have to create a component reference and the view child with the view container reference. Like that's actually a container. So inside that container, we should also have to create a component factory resolver. And the main thing is we should have to create an instance of when we should have to call that component factory resolver. Inside that, we should have to pass our component. So this is kind of an extra thing we were actually doing in our past Angular versions. And after passing that component inside my factory, so that's actually been a partial space for passing the components towards factory, and that factory is being assigned to the container. And that container then after it's been loading over the dynamic component. So that's actually the strategy before Angular v13. So let's see how in Angular v13 we have adapted those things. Okay. So now in creating the dynamic components after v13 is like there is no need to use component factory resolver. So we don't have to use the component factory resolver. Right. So how we are going to use that? So if we are comparing the above slide with it, so there's a lot of a boilerplate code in the above one. So here, if you can see, we have a component reference, we have the component reference. But if you can see inside the constructor, we are not using component factory resolver anymore. So this is the Angular v13, and after v13, we have avoided component factory resolver. So we don't have to worry about that, and we don't have to use that and pass the component toward this factory resolver, and that factory should be passed into the component reference and into the container. So, but in v13, we only have to pass directly the component towards inside the container. So, like it's pretty simple. So you should only have to create a component reference, and inside that container, after creating that instance, you should have to call the pre-built method, which is create component, and pass your component inside that. So that's been automatically being loaded over. So that's kind of a very that's kind of a very big achievement in v13 Angular had did. So while using those dynamic components, people are avoiding to use that because there is a lot of boilerplate code needed over. So for that time, they are for that reason, they are using multiple components and calling those with selectors or with the conditional or routing basis. So for that, it's been loaded. That component is being loaded in your build time. So that's kind of a very performance things as well. So every product should have to face that. But now after Angular v13, you don't have to worry about those boilerplate code, and you should have to adapt, and you should have to move your components over the Angular v13. And there is an amazing API update from Angular v13. So yeah. So this is all about the creating dynamic components. And thank you all. This session is ended up that dynamic component creation. So yeah, you guys can take a look on over the slides here. And also I have also shared my Twitter and my GitHub URL. So you should have to take a look on it if you are an Angular developer. So you should have to take a reference of the source code I'm being using and doing over. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, for attending this event. And we are having we are having an amazing lineups with Tracy, Emma, and myself. So hope you guys enjoyed a lot. So yeah. Okay, so thank you so much, guys, for attending